Hey folks, my name is Cooper, and this is my review of the game Mouthwashing. Mouthwashing is a psychological horror game that released last September. It is a story-based game with very little in the way of gameplay mechanics. It is very much there to tell a story with its characters, its art, and its writing. It has low poly graphics, sort of in line with what you would see back in like the PS2, GameCube era, sort of what my generation grew up with as kids, which is pretty endearing and I think does a good job of sort of bucking the trend of realistic graphics, going more for those larger pixels, less defined, less realistic art, sort of jagged lines, which still create a pretty stark image. And I think specifically with this game, which is very much a psychological horror, again, a lot of it, the art style sort of lends to that rough, harsh reality that the characters find themselves in. This game is the plot is that you are part of a crew on a spaceship that has crashed. The story or the story jumps around a lot. You are either in scenes from before the crash, where you are acting as the pilot of the ship, Curly, or you are in scenes after the crash, where you are taking on the role as Jimmy, who is the second in command, who takes on the role as captain after the crash. Most of the story and the art itself is pretty abstract. I was struggling to figure out a way to say this, but I think the best way I could phrase it is it almost felt more like hallucinations. There's no supernatural, there's no superpowers or time traveling or aliens or demons or fairies or witches in this game. It is a spaceship sort of futuristic type of game, but there is very little in terms of sci-fi elements. You are on a spaceship delivering cargo across the solar system, but there is no extraterrestrial interference. There is no warp drives, faster than light travel, etc. The hallucinations, again, this stuff that is outside of reality, is more abstract. It is meant more figuratively, meant more just to get you to experience things. It's a video game, right? I don't know how else to put it. It's something that you'll understand it when you play the game, but it's just a way to get across the themes that it's looking to get across, which I think is the first place to start with this. Usually I would start with the plot or maybe the characters, but I think for this game, the themes that it's focusing on are really, if not its strongest point, then what it is most focused on delivering. The initial part of the game and where I thought it was really going to focus on was on the corporate aspect of the story and the characters, the situation they find themselves in. They are part of a company corporation called Pony Express, where they work as long-distance freight haulers, cargo haulers, but instead of being truckers, they are on a spaceship. So there are 5 members of this crew, and they have been hired, other than one new hire, but these folks seem like they've been around for several years working together in this same sort of industry. You get the impression that the trip takes about a year, so again, a very long-term trip. And a lot of the focus initially on is this idea of the company, a lot of allusions to something like Amazon, right? Where Amazon, their logo is supposed to be like a smile. All this idea of them tweeting like they're anthropomorphic people, the idea of employee first cultures, but again, you hear the stories of Amazon folks not being able to go to the bathroom, right? Having to pee in bottles, or the lady at Walmart who was involved in a terrorist shooting and was denied time off while she still had a bullet in her foot, right? There was a woman at Walmart who was employed, took one too many days off because she was sick, was fired because of it, and then ended up dying because she didn't have health insurance and didn't want to go to the hospital, right? You hear these sort of tales of corporate terror all the time, right? This horrific treatment of people, how they sometimes in a massive company, again, workers are almost treated like ants, asked to just sort of carry out your work as a mindless drone under the direction of your leadership. And this game definitely alludes to that a lot early on. The other major theme is the mouthwashing. Where that comes from is that early on in the game, in one of the first post-crash scenes. I think it's the first scene after the initial opening, is breaking into the cargo hold, because at this point they have crashed. They want to see if there's anything in there that can help them survive. Again, specifically, you would hope for food or really sort of any supplies, maybe something that they could use to assemble some sort of SOS signal, right? A way to send long distance communications, perhaps. What the crew finds in the storage hold is very cynical, very depressing. They find mouthwash, thousands and thousands of crates full of mouthwash. And not just mouthwash, but some awful sugar-filled, not even useful mouthwash, right? I think part of what they said was it doesn't even work because there's so much sugar, it's rotting your teeth while you wash your mouth. So just that whole idea of a year of their life, right? A substantial chunk of their life, and at this point it seems like it's going to be their graveyard, was dedicated to shipping useless mouthwash across the galaxy. I thought that was a really good theme, right? This idea that of all the things they could have been shipping, of all the things to dedicate your life to, it's this meaningless product that not only is it meaningless, but you had a chance to have something in these boxes that was saving your life. It adds further insult to injury that not only was a huge chunk of your life dedicated to shipping mouthwash, but now this place is more likely to become your graveyard because that's what you were shipping, as opposed to something that actually mattered, made an impact in any regard, right? But they didn't even just leave it there. I thought that the way they took it, where specifically Swansea used the mouthwash as alcohol. Swansea mentioned that he had been sober for, I think, 15 years, and noticed that there was a high enough percentage of ethanol content in there that drinking the mouthwash would eventually get you drunk. So more or less in every scene after the crash, Swansea is seen plastered off of drinking mouthwash, which is disgusting. It is genuinely disgusting to imagine. I mean, out of all the disgusting imagery in this game, it is one of the more revolting things to imagine, drinking enough mouthwash to get drunk. It just really helps present how hopeless the situation they are in, especially, again, that reaction from Swansea. And they tend to use the mouthwash bottles, the empty bottles, as a way to signify, as the months go on after the crash, how desperate and depressing the situation has gotten by showing these mountains of bottles stacked up throughout the ship. The other themes generally revolved around Jimmy, the character you play after the crash. Things around regret, owning up to your actions, responsibility, taking ownership. I don't really want to get into it because you can't really get into it without major spoilers. So I guess I would say that it was generally good and made sense, but I think was part of the downfall of the game was how much time they spent on it. It was just very repetitive, saying sort of the same message over and over again, hitting the same theme in the same way. And it really just felt like a waste of time the longer you got in the game. This was a 3-hour game. I think it was 2:45 for me. Should have been an hour and a half. Hour 45 max. So I think that this specific theme, the themes around Jimmy, kind of shot the game in the foot for me. Again, it's kind of hard to say because that ended up being the main theme of the game, or the main set of themes, but I really would have preferred that they focused more on the corporate aspect of it, and again, that sort of mouthwashing, the cynicism, the depravity of your life being dedicated to something so meaningless and so worthless. But they didn't, so is what it is. I didn't design the game. The plot, again, this is very much a story game. There's very little in terms of gameplay mechanics. Most of it is just walking around, occasionally collecting a couple of items, occasionally punching in a couple of numbers. There's not really much in the way of puzzles. There are, I think, 3 sequences that I would consider puzzles, and even then it's very much just you understand how a mechanic works, you walk around and do what the mechanic is, and then you've solved the puzzle. It's not really much in terms of gameplay. It is a story game, 1, 2, and 3. I thought that the setup for the mystery, the very opening scene where not only are you shown how the crisis occurs, the crash, but you actually initiate the crash. I thought that was a very cool way to introduce the game. It sort of very quickly puts you in the situation, very quickly tells you what's going on, and introduces you to the entire impetus of the entire plot, the reason the story exists. And the rest of the game is figuring out why it happened, right? Why this 3 minute scene in the very beginning? What could have possibly caused that decision to be made by what was actually you? So I thought that was a very cool way to introduce the game. The game jumps around a ton, like I mentioned, from the after the crash to before the crash. Sort of the before the crash is the mystery of what would lead the captain to do something like this, right? You play as the captain, and as far as you can tell, he seems to be pretty sane, pretty normal. So it's just this very odd sort of mystery of why would he do something so disastrous and try to kill himself and everybody else on board. The post-crash scenes are very much in contrast to that, where again the pre-crash scenes, it's just life is normal, sort of the ho-hum, the corporate overlord themes are there, but other than that you're just living your life, going about your days. And then the post-crash scenes are that very clear decay over time, the impending march toward, or the march towards impending doom, which they eventually deem moving towards a time known as judgment, which is a very not very well explained. Again, a lot of this game is sort of abstract, open to interpretation. The contrast between the two, the before and the after scenes, it was very stark, and I thought was a cool way to present the game. Definitely two very different sets of themes, two very different moods and tones, and it only got more dramatic. Again, there's a certain point at which you stop seeing the before scenes and you're only in the after, which I thought was the weakest point. I thought that when it was transitioning between the two was by far the stronger portion of the game. But by the time you were only in that after crash scene or stage, it was far more dramatic than it was in the beginning. I think that, again, I'm sort of alluding to it, but I think the first half of the game was pretty strong on the plot. Again, I really like mystery stories where you get this, I've said this in my other reviews, but a single kernel of information and kind of branch out and build this web and sort of connect different pieces of information that you're given, and eventually you get a couple of aha moments of, oh, this is why that mystery is a mystery in the first place, right? You solve the mystery that you've been presented in the very beginning. Sort of learning the characters themselves, their goals, their motives, their pasts, as well as understanding the ramifications of the crash, again, in those after crash scenes, as well as giving you time to sort of speculate on why this crash would have happened, what could have possibly led to that decision of intentionally crashing the ship. The latter half of the game, though, again, I just thought was really weak. This is a story-based game with very little gameplay in terms of gameplay mechanics, right? Mostly you're just walking around, reading stuff. I thought the context of the crash was fine. I thought it was pretty weak, but I guess it was supposed to be like a big aha, whoa moment. I don't mean to downplay the severity of what happens. It's pretty awful. But following what happens, or the big reveal, it just felt like there was not really any more story to be told. It felt like the story had wrapped up halfway through the game. Like there were no more revelations. There was no more information to learn. It was more just this tedious sort of trek towards the end of the game, this journey of, again, interesting imagery, the art, the themes were interesting, but I just thought it got really repetitive, really stale, sort of telling the same things the same way, not even really hitting it from different angles very often. There were a couple of scenes that were interesting, but a lot of it towards the end, I was just waiting for the game to wrap up and end because I was just bored with it. I had finished the story and there was still an hour of the game left, so I just thought the reveal was really weak. Some of this is a personal bias where I prefer my games to be a little bit more ethereal, a little bit more larger than life. Not necessarily like alien invasion and stuff, but more conspiratorial, right? Or this larger thing going on. Whereas in this game, there was no larger thing going on. It was just a discovery that happened that led to this. It was a very grounded in the reality, more of this commentary on human decision making, the human psyche, which is just not really my cup of tea when it's done in this type of way. I can enjoy that, but I just did not like it in this case. I found the motivation for the crash to be pretty unsatisfying, and I just again, it made sense to an extent, but I just thought it was really boring and didn't really like it. It didn't really stick with me, I guess. It kind of just devalued the entire story too. Once I realized, oh, this is it, and now we're just kind of playing out that conclusion for another hour and 15 minutes. Really made me just care a little bit less about all the other characters that weren't central to the crash, and it just de-emphasized some of the every other theme. Right, the corporation stuff just got super de-emphasized by the end of the game. I thought they set that up pretty strong at the beginning of the game, and then just kind of abandoned it. So is what it is. It's not the story they wanted to tell, but I was pretty disappointed by that. The characters, uh, I thought the designs, the actual art was good. I thought they all looked very distinctive and unique, and I thought the way that they looked tied pretty well into their personalities, if that even makes sense. I thought all the personalities were pretty good and unique, very tropey, but I actually don't mind that. I kind of like that. And they all had depth to them. It's not like they were just a flat two-dimensional trope and that was it. Overall, though, honestly, again, despite having some depth, they were kind of forgettable just in terms of their lives and their stories. I do remember all of their images, and I do remember all of their general personalities and motivations, but I can't say I really cared about them that much. Uh, I thought each character had a couple of good moments. Just sort of I think it just suffered the same fate as the rest of the game and the whole plot, where the twist that was supposed to be it's supposed to be the grand reveal of the game. The whole reason the game exists is because there was a ship crash, and the ship crash was um, preceded, or again, the reason the crash happened is because of this twist that you learned, and I thought the twist sucked. So it's kind of just a slog where the characters don't really matter, the story doesn't really matter, the plot doesn't really matter. You're just kind of walking around getting to the end of the game, because if the main reason the story exists is boring, then the story itself can't be very good. So I guess the fate of all the characters was kind of interesting, but pretty predictable the longer you got into the game. I thought the end of the game itself, the very final scene, the actual judgment, was super boring, super predictable, and just did not have much of an impact on me. It was a little disturbing, a little bit creepy, but I just didn't really care. Especially at that point, I did not care. I will say, though, that Curly, the captain, is well designed, very disturbing. I know I mentioned that the mouthwash stuff was disturbing. Curly was the most disturbing part of this game. There's a scene late in the game where he is fed something, is all I will say, and that is incredibly disturbing as a scene. Specifically in the early parts when you're feeding him medicine, the sound he makes when he opens his mouth and closes his mouth is awful. It just makes your skin crawl, which obviously is how they intended it to be. You nailed that one. You nailed that one. I'll give you credit for that, because that is awful, and I hated it every time. But in sort of like this morbid, curious way, where I couldn't help but click it a couple extra times just to make myself squirm. Um, so the characters, again, solid, just sort of suffered the same fate where if you're a good character in a bad story, you can't be that good of a character. The art style is definitely the thing that I appreciate the most in retrospect. It's very cool. Again, the sort of low poly PS2 looking graphics. They did a good job with that. And I can't deny some of those images have definitely stuck with me. It's a lot more of a memorable experience than some other forms of media you will have seen. A lot of movies I've seen, right, haven't stuck with me as much as this game has. Those cut to black sort of creepy messages were always pretty cool, or the sort of dissolve away fade to another scene. Often they would do that when they were going before and after Crash, sort of changing the timeline. The mountains of mouthwash I mentioned earlier are pretty cool, just as like the symbolic sort of, you see the despair and the chaos, right? The way that they sort of give up over time and lose hope. I thought that was a cool visual design choice. The character art I liked. And overall, I just thought this was the best part of the game, was the art, the sort of mood, the sound effects along with it, the whole presentation of the game itself, which, again, I think the story was very underwhelming by the end of it. But the art and the sort of style that they chose overall in terms of the mood and the tone, I thought was very strong, and was not necessarily impacted by the weakness of the story. So overall, I mean, I'm glad I played the game. I think in retrospect, this is the perfect game to just watch on YouTube. Again, I'm not going to plug my own stuff, but I think that in retrospect, I think just watching a YouTuber play this game is maybe even a better experience because you can kind of skip some of the boring parts or just let somebody kind of talk over it to keep some sort of entertainment going. Again, I'm not like a brain rotted, I need entertainment every 5 seconds, but I just thought the story kind of was over with an hour plus left. So it's a 3 hour game where like an hour and a half of the game is good. Just watch it on YouTube, or again, if you really need to play the game, I would wait till it goes on sale. It's maybe a $5 game for me personally. If you want to pay full price, again, I got it at $10 on sale. I think it's 12 right now. Go for it. It's not like some huge investment, but I just didn't quite think it was worth it. Just for me personally, I think you're going to get the same experience on YouTube because there's not much in terms of gameplay, and there are definitely parts I would have preferred to skip. I will say I would be an idiot not to acknowledge that I am in the minority in my opinion on this game. It has overwhelming positive reviews on Steam. There seems to be a whole fan base around it. There's a whole like Reddit community that's actively posting. This game came out 6 months ago, and people are still like very into the characters and stuff, which I was kind of surprised by. I get the impression it's more like younger people, again, more of like this fan art sort of abstracting the characters from the game itself, but it's kind of a weird game for a fandom to develop on, but the characters are pretty unique. You do you, right? I have to concede that the game made a big impact on a lot of people, right? I mean, I'd be stupid not to acknowledge that. And at the end of the day, right, I did have a decent amount of ruminating on the game itself after the fact. Again, it was more like, okay, these were the themes, this was the story. I'm pretty disappointed by the story, but some of the images definitely stuck in my head. A couple of the more jarring scenes. Again, the twist I found very underwhelming, but I still thought about it sometimes. I wasn't satisfied with the game, but I would be lying if I said it was not worth playing. And frankly, pretty memorable. The comparison I ended up coming up with was Firewatch, which came out several years ago. I played maybe when I was 18 or 19. Similar in terms of story-based game that is mostly just walking around, learning the characters, learning the story. Very heavy on themes with a twist that, again, is not some grand conspiracy. It's not some grand thing that I tend to personally like, but was supposed to be like this powerful human message, and I just didn't really resonate with it. So but at the same time, I still remember that game. I still remember scenes of that game. I still remember the twist, right? I'd be insane not to say that it clearly had an impact on me, even if I didn't love the game. I was almost, like, a way to describe it is I was almost, like, upset that the game got me to buy in at the beginning and early on, because I thought it delivered such an underwhelming story by the end of it. But again, a lot of that is just my personal preference in terms of the types of stories I like to see. So I do acknowledge that, and I do acknowledge that the art was cool. Again, a lot of this is me talking about both Firewatch and Mouthwashing. I think both of them, in my opinion, really failed to deliver a satisfying story, satisfying twists, a satisfying collusion, series of character arcs even, but the art was good and memorable, and I do remember these stories. I remember the story of Firewatch 10 years later, right? I can't deny that, right? It clearly stuck with me whether or not I enjoyed my process of playing the game or felt like it was rewarding. So overall, I give the game a 5 out of 10. I know that that's just how I felt about the game. I just didn't love it. I didn't hate it, and again, it's interesting because a 5 is perfectly average, but it was not an average experience for me. Far from it. I was quite engaged for the first half and just incredibly bored and disappointed for the second half. It was this weird contrast where there were parts I really liked and parts I really didn't. I thought the first half was great and the second half was awful. I thought the art was great and the story was awful. I thought like the ambiance or the mood was great, and I thought the puzzles, the actual gameplay was awful. I just really didn't end up enjoying my experience by the end of it. And for a game that has very little in terms of gameplay mechanics, which even those I didn't really like that much, um, if the story's not satisfying, the game's not satisfying, right? There's nothing you can really do to make up for that. So it kind of fell flat to me, but I do understand why so many people do like this game and why it seems like some people had it really resonate. I think this is going to be a polarizing game, right? Where, again, there were parts of it that I really liked and parts that I really didn't. I can't imagine many people are just going to be kind of indifferent to this game. I think you're either going to really like it or really hate it, or maybe be like me, where there are parts that you really like and really hate. So, personally, I would have rather just watched someone play this game as opposed to have actually spent the time playing it myself. I would have liked to have skipped around some parts, maybe even just read like a synopsis of the game, but I don't regret my time with the game. Overall, again, a 5 makes it sound a little bit more, I feel like, disparaging, right? It's like you're mid, but it's not a mid game. It is a game that is absolutely going to stick with me. Had a lot of ups, a lot of downs, and at the very least, I think is worth checking out. Again, I'd watch it on YouTube as opposed to buying the game, but yeah, interesting, fascinating game, fascinating experience. That I can certainly say. So that's my review of Mouthwashing. Appreciate y'all's time. Hope you have a great day.